The Anatomy of Fascism by Robert O. Paxton is a comprehensive and scholarly examination of fascism as a political movement, ideology, and system. Paxton, a historian renowned for his work on the history of fascism, delves deep into the origins, development, and characteristics of fascist movements across Europe in the 20th century. In this influential work, Paxton rejects the idea that fascism is simply an ideology, or a coherent, universally applicable set of principles. Instead, he offers a nuanced analysis, arguing that fascism is a dynamic, ever-evolving phenomenon shaped by specific social, political, and economic contexts. This review will explore the key themes and arguments presented in The Anatomy of Fascism, examining Paxton's contributions to our understanding of fascist movements and their appeal. The emergence of fascism. Paxton begins by dissecting the historical emergence of fascism, particularly in the wake of World War I. The collapse of long-standing political and social systems across Europe, exacerbated by the trauma of war, economic instability, and class conflict, provided fertile ground for the rise of authoritarian movements. Fascism, according to Paxton, emerged not in isolation, but as part of a broader reaction to the perceived threats of socialism, communism, and liberal democracy. It was a movement that sought to restore order and national pride by rejecting the chaos and fragmentation of the post-war period. The central characteristics of fascism, as Paxton outlines, include nationalism, anti-communism, and a commitment to a strong, centralized state. However, fascism is not simply an ideology based on these elements. It is also a political practice rooted in the dynamics of mass mobilization, charismatic leadership, and the use of violence to achieve political goals. Paxton emphasizes that fascism was not a fixed, immutable force, but a political strategy that adapted to the changing circumstances of the time. Fascism as a political movement. One of the central themes in The Anatomy of Fascism is the distinction between fascism as an ideology and fascism as a political movement. Paxton argues that fascism is first and foremost a political practice that evolves through interaction with other political forces. Unlike Marxist or liberal ideologies, which claim to provide a comprehensive vision for society, fascism is more pragmatic and opportunistic. Fascist movements rarely developed from a fully formed ideological blueprint. Rather, they were driven by the need to consolidate power and appeal to a broad base of support. Fascism's appeal to different segments of society was based on a combination of factors. For the working class, fascism promised a solution to the perceived failures of socialist movements and a rejection of the class-based politics of the left. For the middle class, it offered a sense of security and protection from the threat of revolution and the destabilizing forces of economic and social upheaval. For the elites, fascism provided a way to maintain their power and privilege while ensuring the stability of the state. The key to fascism's success was its ability to mobilize large segments of the population through mass organizations and charismatic leaders. Paxton discusses the role of paramilitary groups such as the Black Shirts in Italy and the Brown Shirts in Germany in advancing the fascist agenda. These organizations were not merely tools of violence, but also important vehicles for building a sense of community and collective identity among supporters. Through rallies, propaganda, and the creation of a sense of national renewal, fascist movements were able to transform themselves from marginal political forces into dominant political powers. Fascist ideology and nationalism. Paxton argues that nationalism is at the core of fascist ideology, though it takes different forms in different contexts. Fascist nationalism is often rooted in a sense of national decline or humiliation, which is perceived as the result of internal decay or external threats. In Italy, for example, fascism was built around the idea of a mutilated victory in World War I and the desire to restore Italy to its former glory. In Germany, fascism was fueled by resentment over the Treaty of Versailles and the belief that the country had been unfairly treated by the international community. Fascism's nationalism is also deeply exclusionary. Paxton stresses that fascism is built on the idea of a unified national community that is defined by shared ethnic, cultural, and historical characteristics. This exclusivity often leads to the marginalization, persecution, or elimination of minority groups such as Jews, Roma, and political dissidents. Fascist nationalism is not merely a call for national unity, but also a justification for the use of violence against those deemed to be outsiders or enemies of the nation. The role of leadership and charisma. Another key aspect of fascism discussed by Paxton is the role of charismatic leadership. Fascism often centers around a single dominant leader who embodies the values and aspirations of the nation. These leaders, such as Benito Mussolini in Italy and Adolf Hitler in Germany, were not only political figures, but also symbolic representations of the nation's strength and destiny. Paxton emphasizes that fascist leaders were able to mobilize popular support not only through their political platforms, but also through their personal charisma and ability to inspire devotion. Fascist leaders were skilled at presenting themselves as the voice of the people, often portraying themselves as outsiders who were standing up against the elites and the establishment. They were adept at using propaganda to create a larger-than-life image of themselves, cultivating a sense of myth and legend around their persona. This charismatic leadership, combined with mass mobilization, was central to the success of fascist movements in the interwar period. Fascism and violence. Violence plays a central role in Paxton's analysis of fascism. Fascism, Paxton argues, is inherently violent, both in its rhetoric and in its actions. The use of force is not only a means of political control, but also a key element in the creation of the fascist community. Fascist movements often employed violence as a tool to suppress opposition, intimidate rivals, and establish their dominance over society. This violence was not only directed at political enemies, but also at social groups deemed to be unworthy of the national community. Paxton explores how violence was central to the identity of fascist movements, pointing out that fascists often glorified war and militarism. The concept of war was not limited to external conflict. It was also used to describe the internal struggle against enemies within the nation. In this way, fascism viewed itself as an ongoing, existential battle for the survival and renewal of the nation. Fascism in power. In the final sections of The Anatomy of Fascism, Paxton examines what happens when fascists come to power. Fascism, as Paxton notes, is not simply about seizing power, but also about transforming society. When fascists gain control of the state, they often seek to reshape the political, social, and economic landscape to reflect their vision of the nation. However, Paxton stresses that fascism does not necessarily involve a complete transformation of society. Instead, it often relies on pragmatic alliances with established elites, such as the military and business leaders, to secure its hold on power. Despite its emphasis on national unity, fascism often encourages the development of a hierarchical and fragmented society. For example, fascist regimes often empowered certain groups, such as the military and paramilitary organizations, while sidelining others. While fascists sought to eliminate the political left, they also confronted challenges from within their own ranks, including competing factions and ideological divisions. The tension between revolutionary goals and pragmatic compromises was a constant feature of fascist regimes once they were in power. The Anatomy of Fascism provides a rich and nuanced analysis of fascism as a political movement and ideology. Paxton's central argument, that fascism is not a fixed, dogmatic ideology, but rather a dynamic, evolving political practice, offers a valuable framework for understanding the complex nature of fascism. By examining the social, political, and economic conditions that gave rise to fascism, Paxton sheds light on the ways in which fascist movements were able to gain popular support and consolidate power. His work challenges simplistic notions of fascism as a monolithic or universal phenomenon, instead presenting it as a multifaceted and context-dependent force. In his conclusion, Paxton reminds us that fascism is not a thing of the past. While the specific conditions that gave rise to fascism in the 20th century may no longer be present, the lessons of history remain relevant. The appeal of fascism, with its promises of national renewal, strong leadership, and the use of violence to achieve political ends, continues to resonate in certain parts of the world today. Paxton's work is a timely and essential reminder of the dangers of fascism and the need to remain vigilant against its potential resurgence.